The son inherits. Obviously. My brother Garrett said that 3 days after our mother died, standing in her kitchen, eating a sandwich he'd made from her bread and her turkey and her mustard, using her plates, in a house he hadn't set foot in for 11 months. My name is Dana Fletcher. I'm 31 years old. I drove my mother to 37 chemotherapy sessions, 40 minutes each way. I held the bucket. I wiped the sweat. I slept on her couch 4 nights a week so she wouldn't be alone when the nausea hit at 2 in the morning. My brother came home twice during 8 months of chemo. Both times, he measured the living room. The second time, he brought a tape measure. 3 days after Mom died, Garrett filed to evict me. His lawyer submitted Mom's will to the judge. The son is the rightful heir. He was certain. He was confident. He hadn't read page 4. Page 4 had a clause my mother wrote between her second and third rounds of chemo. If either child attempts to remove the other from this home, that child forfeits their share entirely. His own filing triggered it. He evicted himself. If stories like mine matter to you, that subscribe button means more than you know. Let me take you back to Clarksville, Tennessee. A 3-bedroom house on Maple Lane with a covered porch and a dogwood tree that bloomed white every April. My mother, Helen Fletcher, bought that house in 1998 with money saved from 21 years of working the front desk at a Holiday Inn on Riverside Drive. $11.40 an hour, 6 days a week. She never called in sick. Her manager, Bill Drucker, said at her funeral that in 21 years she missed 2 shifts. Both were when Garrett broke his arm in 8th grade. My father left when I was 4, and Garrett was 8. His name was Paul Fletcher. He drove a delivery truck for a beer distributor out of Nashville. He came home one Friday evening with the truck empty and his checking account emptied and told my mother he was moving on. He didn't say where. He didn't say why. He walked out with a duffel bag and the only pair of good shoes he owned, and he got in his buddy's car and the taillights disappeared down Maple Lane, and that was it. The child support checks came for 3 months. Then 2 months of nothing. Then one final check for $47, not even the full amount, just whatever he had left after wherever the rest went. Then permanent silence. My mother cashed every check and put the money in an envelope in the kitchen drawer. She labeled it Paul owed. She kept that envelope for 5 years. When it became clear he was never paying again, she took the money out, $412, and bought me a winter coat and Garrett a pair of football cleats. She said, "Your father bought you those." It was the last time she used his name in a sentence. My mother never mentioned him after that. Not with anger, not with grief. He was a blank line in the family story. Like a chapter ripped from a book where the pages on either side didn't match, but nobody talked about the gap. The house on Maple Lane was everything to my mother. Not because it was fancy, it wasn't. The kitchen cabinets were from 1983. The carpet in the hallway had a worn spot from 20 years of foot traffic between the kitchen and the bedrooms. The back door stuck in summer because the humidity made the wood swell, but she owned it. She'd signed the papers herself. No husband, no co-signer. Just Helen Fletcher and a bank officer at First Federal who told her she'd need a bigger down payment. She saved for 3 more months and came back with exactly the amount they'd asked for. She kept the closing documents in a lockbox under her bed. I found them once when I was looking for Christmas presents. I didn't understand what they were, but I noticed my mother's name was the only one on every page. That mattered to her. It mattered to me too, though I didn't know why until much later. Garrett was the louder child. Football at Clarksville High. Defensive end. Picture in the Leaf Chronicle twice. He walked into rooms and assumed the room had been waiting. Teachers liked him because he was charming. Coaches liked him because he was big. The girls in school liked him because he had blue eyes and a confidence that came from never having been told no by anyone who mattered. He called me little sis, in front of his friends. Not with affection, with ownership, like I was a footnote in his story rather than a character in my own. He broke my science fair project the night before the competition. 7th grade. A model of the solar system I'd built from styrofoam balls and coat hangers over 3 weeks. He walked through the living room with a football and knocked it off the table. Saturn shattered. Mars rolled under the couch. He said, "Oops." Then he went to practice. I rebuilt it in 4 hours. Without Saturn. Without Mars. I placed 6th. The judges said the display was creative, but incomplete. I didn't tell them why it was incomplete. I just smiled and carried the ribbon home and put it in a drawer and didn't mention it at dinner. Mom noticed the missing planets. She didn't say anything to Garrett. She walked into the living room after he'd gone to bed, picked the broken Saturn off the floor, held it in her hand for a long time, and put it in the junk drawer next to my father's last child support check. 2 broken things. Same drawer. I was quiet. I sat in the back row. I did homework at the kitchen table while Mom was at work and Garrett was at practice. I learned to cook because somebody had to. By 12, I could make chicken and dumplings, cornbread, and navy beans from dried. Mom came home from a 10-hour shift one Tuesday and found dinner on the table. Plate set. Napkins folded. Sweet tea poured. She stood in the doorway for a long time. "You didn't have to do this, Dana." "I know, but you did." "I know." She sat down. She didn't say anything else. But she squeezed my hand under the table. Once. That was how Mom said I love you. Not with words. With one squeeze when nobody was looking. Garrett didn't squeeze. Garrett took the bigger room. He claimed it when he was 11 and I was 7, even though the rooms were the same size. He said he needed the space. For what? A football and a pile of laundry he never washed. The first plate at dinner every night, he served himself before Mom sat down. The car keys, without asking, he took Mom's Honda out 3 times in senior year without telling her. She found out because the gas gauge moved. Credit for things he didn't do. He once told the neighbor Mrs. Patterson he'd mowed the lawn when I'd been the one pushing the mower for 3 hours in August heat while he played video games in the air conditioning. Mrs. Patterson gave him a glass of lemonade. He drank it on the porch while I wiped sweat off my neck with the bottom of my t-shirt. Christmas morning, 2007. I was 13. Garrett was 17. Mom had saved for 3 months to buy us both gifts. She got Garrett a pair of Nike basketball shoes, $110, the most she'd ever spent on a single item. She got me a silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a dogwood flower. She'd found it at an antique store in Nashville and had it cleaned and polished. She told me later it cost $40. Garrett looked at the shoes, tried them on. Wrong color. He said it flat. Not rude. Worse. Indifferent. Like the 3 months of saving were a scheduling error. He wore them twice and left them in his closet. I still wear the necklace. When Mom turned 50, I planned a dinner. I was 20. I made her favorite meal, chicken and dumplings, cornbread, sweet tea. I set the table with the good plates. I bought a cake from the bakery on Madison Street, chocolate with vanilla frosting, her name written in blue icing because blue was her color. I invited Mrs. Patterson and Linda Morrison and 3 of Mom's friends from church. Garrett said he'd come. He didn't. He texted at 6:15, "Running late." Traffic. He never came. The traffic between Nashville and Clarksville is 40 minutes. He had until 9. Mom blew out the candles with 5 women and her daughter. She didn't mention Garrett. She didn't need to. His empty chair said everything. Mom noticed. She always noticed. She didn't confront. She filed things away the way you file receipts, organized, categorized, waiting for the day they'd be needed. She said something to me once I was 16 that I didn't understand until the courtroom. We were sitting on the porch. September. The dogwood was starting to turn. She was drinking sweet tea from the glass with the chip on the rim that she refused to throw away because it was the first glass she bought when she moved into the house. She said, "Dana, you know what I've learned in 20 years at the Holiday Inn?" "What?" "The people who complain the loudest get the least done. And the people who get the most done never need to complain." She sipped her tea. I didn't respond. I was 16. I thought she was talking about work. She was talking about her children. When I was 12, Mom started a garden in the backyard. Tomatoes, basil, green beans, and a row of marigolds along the fence because she said marigolds kept the bugs away. She taught me how to plant seeds, how to space them, how to water without drowning, how to tell when a tomato is ripe by the color at the stem, not the color at the bottom. Garrett never helped in the garden. He said gardening was pointless because you could buy tomatoes at Kroger for $1.49 a pound. Mom didn't argue. She just kept planting. Every spring, every year, row by row, the way she did everything. After high school, Garrett moved to Nashville, sold cars at a dealership on Dickerson Pike, bought a truck he couldn't afford, rented an apartment with granite countertops because he said granite shows people you're serious. He came home for Thanksgiving sometimes. He'd walk through the front door and say, "Place looks the same," like that was a criticism. I stayed in Clarksville, got my associate's degree at Austin Peay State University, business administration. I worked while I studied the front desk at the Hampton Inn on Wilma Rudolph Boulevard because the hospitality gene runs in the family. 3 nights a week. I learned to smile at people who were tired and angry and lost and needed someone to say, "I can help you with that," like they meant it. I meant it every time, because that's what my mother did. Every shift. For 21 years. After graduation, I got a job at a property management company downtown. Entry level. Filing. Answering phones. Learning how leases work and how a good landlord calls back in 24 hours and a bad one lets the voicemail fill up. I was good at the details. I was good at the things other people didn't want to do. The maintenance logs, the tenant complaints, the spreadsheets that tracked who paid on time and who didn't and why. My boss, Linda Morrison, lived 3 houses down from Mom on Maple Lane. She'd watched me grow up. She'd seen me mowing the lawn when Garrett was inside. She'd seen me carrying groceries from the Honda when Garrett was in Nashville. She hired me because she said I had Helen's work ethic and twice her patience. That was the highest compliment anyone had ever given me. I worked my way up. In 3 years, I went from filing to assistant property manager. I managed 11 residential units on the east side of Clarksville, working-class tenants, families, single mothers, retired couples on fixed incomes. I knew every name. I knew which units had the leaky faucets and which ones had the temperamental furnace. When Mr. Hadley in 4B couldn't make rent one February because his hours at the plant got cut, I worked out a payment plan on a napkin at the kitchen table. Linda said I managed like a neighbor, not a landlord. I said, I learned that from my mother because I earned $34,000 a year. Not a lot, but combined with living at Mom's where I paid no rent because Mom refused, though I paid the electric and the water and the groceries, I saved $12,000 a year. Every year. I kept it in a savings account at First Federal, the same bank where Mom had gotten her mortgage. The same bank where a loan officer had once told her she needed a bigger down payment and she'd come back 3 months later with exactly the right number. I thought about that every time I made a deposit. She came back. She always came back. I lived in Mom's house. Not because I couldn't afford rent somewhere else. I'd been saving since my first paycheck, the way Mom taught me, the way she'd saved for the down payment on the house itself. I lived there because she was alone, because the house was too quiet with one person, because the porch swing creaked at night, and she told me once she imagined it was someone sitting next to her even though no one was. Because on the nights when she came home from a 10-hour shift and her feet hurt and her back ached and she sat in the recliner with her shoes still on double knotted, the way she always tied them, tight, because she said loose shoes cause blisters, and blisters cause missed shifts, and missed shifts caused bills. I was the one who knelt down on the carpet and untied them for her. Left shoe first, then right. Then I'd set them by the door and bring her a glass of sweet tea, and we'd watch Wheel of Fortune without talking, because talking wasn't required. Being there was required, and I was always there. Garrett never untied anyone's shoes. Garrett never stayed for Wheel of Fortune. Garrett had granite countertops and a truck payment and a life in Nashville that required him to be somewhere other than Maple Lane 7 days a week. He called Mom on Sundays. Sometimes, when he remembered, which was not always, she never complained. She'd set her phone on the kitchen counter every Sunday morning and look at it once or twice while she made coffee. If it rang, she'd answer on the first ring. If it didn't ring, she'd drink her coffee and go to church alone. I went to church with her every Sunday. Same pew. Third from the back, left side. She sang the hymns in a voice that was slightly flat and completely certain. She believed in God the way she believed in the Holiday Inn. Show up, do your best, don't complain. Faith as attendance. Faith as the act of being present when the present is hard. Mom got sick in the spring of 2024. Pancreatic cancer. The oncologist gave her 8 to 12 months. She had 8. I took leave from work. My boss, Linda Morrison, said take whatever I needed. She'd been Mom's neighbor for 12 years. I drove every appointment. 37 chemotherapy sessions at Vanderbilt Medical Center in Nashville. 40 minutes each way on I-24. I learned the highway the way you learn a prayer by repetition, without thinking, until the turns and the exits and the lane changes became automatic and the only thing left to pay attention to was the woman in the passenger seat. The first sessions, Mom talked about the house, about whether the dogwood needed pruning, about the gutters she'd been meaning to clean, about the pot roast recipe she'd gotten from Mrs. Patterson next door that called for rosemary and red wine, and she'd never tried it, but she was going to, as soon as this is over. She talked about normal things because the abnormal thing was sitting in her bloodstream and talking about it wouldn't make it smaller. By session 5, the talking slowed. By session 10, it stopped. She'd sit with her head against the window and her eyes closed, and I'd turn the radio to the country station she liked, not the new country, the old kind, Patsy Cline and Tammy Wynette and Dolly Parton, and I'd drive with both hands on the wheel and one eye on her chest, watching it rise and fall, because I was afraid that if I stopped looking, she'd slip away between 1 mile marker and the next. Session 17 was the hardest. She threw up in the parking lot before we even got inside. I held her hair back with one hand and the bucket with the other, and a woman walking into the building, a stranger, I never learned her name, stopped and handed me a bottle of water and said, "You're doing a good job, honey." I almost lost it right there in the parking lot of Vanderbilt Medical Center at 7:42 inches the morning. But I didn't, because my mother was leaning against me, and she needed me to be the wall. So I was the wall. Session 37 was the last. The oncologist, Dr. Reeves, sat us both down and said the word palliative. Mom nodded. She knew. She'd probably known for weeks. She squeezed my hand under the armrest of the chair in the consultation room. Same squeeze. Same hand. Same woman. Just less of her. During those 8 months, I learned things about my mother I hadn't known. She kept a notebook in the nightstand drawer. Not a diary. A budget. Every dollar. Every month. Going back to 2003. She tracked every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every grocery receipt. She'd written the balances in pencil because pencil can be erased when you need to redo the math, and Helen Fletcher redid the math a lot. 21 years of erasing and rewriting and making $11.40 an hour fit into a life that cost more than $11.40 an hour could buy. I found the notebook while looking for her reading glasses. I sat on her bed and went through it page by page. 20 years of math, 20 years of subtraction. And in the margins, next to the numbers, occasional notes. Dana's braces, $2,400 paid. Garrett's football camp, $800 paid. Roof repair, $3,200 paid with savings. Every time she paid something off, she wrote paid in pencil and circled it. The circles got smaller as the years went on, like she was running out of room or running out of time. I kept the notebook. It sits on the kitchen counter now, next to the sugar bowl. Some people keep photographs on their counter. I keep math. Garrett came home twice during the chemo. The first time, June, he stayed 4 hours. Walked through the house. Place looks the same. Didn't ask about her treatment. Didn't ask about the medications or the side effects or whether she was eating or sleeping or able to walk to the bathroom on her own. He asked about the property value. What do you think this place would go for? I was at the kitchen sink. She's not dead yet, Garrett. I'm just asking. Stop asking. What would you have done? If your brother showed up for the first time in months, said place looks the same, and asked about property values while your mother was on chemo, would you have kept quiet? Or would you have said something you couldn't take back? Drop your honest answer in the comments. The second time, September. He drove down from Nashville in a rental car because he'd sold the truck to pay for the lawyer he was already talking to. He walked through the front door at 11 in the morning without calling first. Mom was in the recliner with the oxygen tube and a blanket and a half-finished crossword puzzle on her lap. He didn't hug her. He didn't sit with her. He walked to the living room and pulled a tape measure from his jacket pocket. A Stanley tape measure. Yellow, 25 feet. The kind contractors use. He measured the wall between the kitchen and the den. He measured the width of the hallway. He measured the bedroom window. I found him in the den measuring the distance between the back wall and the fireplace. What are you doing? Thinking about what could be opened up. She's dying, Garrett, and I'm planning ahead. Someone has to. Someone has to plan? I drove her to 37 chemo sessions. I wiped her face when she couldn't make it to the bathroom. I untie her shoes every night. And you're measuring walls. That's what you do, Dana. You do the nice stuff. I do the practical stuff. The nice stuff. 37 drives to Nashville. 8 months on her couch. Cornbread and navy beans and sweet tea and every night of Wheel of Fortune for 22 years. That was the nice stuff. Mom heard. She was in the recliner. 20 feet away. Oxygen, hissing, eyes open. She didn't say a word. But her hand found the armrest. Knuckles white. The grip of a woman making a decision she's not going to announce. That night, after Garrett drove back to Nashville with his tape measure and his plans, she called her lawyer, Margaret Caldwell on Vine Street. She made a change to the will. The last 2 months were the hardest. October and November. Mom stopped going to the porch. She stopped watering the garden I took over, Tuesdays, the way she'd always done it. She stopped watching Wheel of Fortune because the noise bothered her. We sat in silence instead. The same silence we'd always shared. Just heavier now. Hospice started in October. A nurse named Trish came 3 times a week. She was kind. Professional. She showed me how to adjust the oxygen flow and how to check for swelling and how to count breaths per minute when the breathing got shallow. She said, You're a natural caretaker, Dana, I said. I learned from the patient. Garrett didn't come in October or November. He called once. A Sunday. Mom was sleeping, I answered. How's she doing? She's dying, Garrett. That's how she's doing. Don't be dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being accurate. The hospice nurse comes 3 times a week. She sleeps 18 hours a day. She weighs 102 pounds. She can't walk to the bathroom without holding the wall. That's not dramatic. That's Tuesday. He was quiet for 5 seconds. Then, let me know when I should come. You should have come in June. You should have come in September. You should have come every week for 8 months. But you were busy measuring walls. He hung up. Mrs. Patterson came by every evening with a covered dish. She'd set it on the porch and knock once and leave. Chicken casserole, pot roast, cornbread, the same foods Mom used to make. Mrs. Patterson had been eating Mom's cooking for 18 years, and now she was returning it one dish at a time, like a library book that had been checked out too long. Mom died on a Tuesday in November. I was holding her hand. Trish had stepped out. The oxygen machine hissed. Winter light through the window. Flat. Cold. The kind that doesn't warm anything. She squeezed my hand one last time. Under the blanket. Where nobody was looking. Garrett arrived 2 hours later. Stood in the doorway. When did it happen? 2 hours ago. Why didn't you call me? I did. Voicemail. He walked to the kitchen and made a sandwich. The funeral was Saturday. 81 people. Mom was in the Lions Club Auxiliary, the church choir, and the Clarksville Community Garden. Half the town showed up. Bill Drucker gave the eulogy. 4 minutes. He talked about reliability. He talked about the 21 years and the 2 missed shifts and the time she reorganized the reservation system on a legal pad during a power outage. He said Helen Fletcher ran that front desk like a general. That sounds right. Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived next door for 18 years, spoke about Mom's garden. How she'd shared tomatoes every August. How she'd shown up with a casserole when Mrs. Patterson's husband had his hip replaced. How she never asked for anything back. Garrett spoke for 6 minutes. Football games she'd attended. Dinners she'd cooked. He mentioned the house 3 times. He mentioned Mom's smile twice. He mentioned himself 11 times. I counted because I was sitting in the front row, and counting is what I do when I can't cry anymore. I spoke for 2 minutes. I said, Mom squeezed hands under the table. I said she untied her shoes when she was too tired to bend. I said she made a house into a home by never leaving it. That was enough. 2 minutes. 19 sentences. Every one of them true. Afterward, people lined up to hug me. Not Garrett. Mrs. Drucker, Bill's wife, held me for 10 seconds without speaking. She smelled like the lavender hand cream she and Mom had bought in bulk from the same Avon catalog for 15 years. Pastor Collins shook my hand and said, Your mother told me once that you were her anchor. I didn't understand what she meant until today. Hadley, the tenant from 4B, came in his only suit. He told me he'd driven from the east side because Mrs. Fletcher helped me when the plant cut my hours. She didn't do it herself. She raised someone who did. Linda Morrison didn't hug me. She just stood next to me and put her hand on my arm and said, I'm right here for whatever comes next. She knew. She'd been Mom's neighbor long enough to see Garrett measure the living room. She'd watched his truck come and go in 4 hours. She knew what was coming. Everyone in that church had seen my car in Mom's driveway every day for 8 months. They'd seen me at the pharmacy, at the grocery store buying ginger ale and saltines, at the gas station filling up for the Nashville run. They knew who had been there, and they knew who hadn't. 3 days later, a Tuesday, Garrett was in the kitchen. making a sandwich. Turkey on white. Mom's bread. Mom's plates. He'd been in the house since Saturday night. I'd been in Mom's bedroom sorting her medications into bags for the pharmacy return. He hadn't offered to help with the sorting. He hadn't asked about the medications or the hospice equipment or the oxygen tanks that needed to be picked up or the insurance paperwork that was stacked on the kitchen counter in a pile I'd been working through for a week. He was eating a sandwich and scrolling his phone. The son inherits. Obviously. He said it the way he'd say the score of a football game. Like it was already decided. Like the whistle had blown. The next morning, Wednesday Mrs. Patterson told me she saw Garrett on Mom's porch, talking on the phone, pacing. Comps, she heard him say. Recent sales. Per square foot. He was calling a real estate agent. Before the will had been read. Before the estate had been opened. Before the first utility bill had arrived with Mom's name on it and nobody to write the check. He filed the eviction Thursday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Linda Morrison called. She'd seen a process server walking down Maple Lane. Dana, there's a man with a clipboard coming to your door. He knocked at 9:14 a.m. I opened the door in my mother's bathrobe, the plaid flannel one she'd worn every morning for 10 years. The server handed me a manila envelope. Inside, a motion to vacate filed by Garrett Paul Fletcher through his attorney, Robert Fenton of Nashville. Exhibit A, the will. Mom's will. The one she wrote at Margaret Caldwell's office while I sat in the waiting room, not knowing what she was putting on page 4. He wanted me out by January 1st. 31 days to leave the house my mother bought with 21 years of labor. The house where I'd cook dinner every night. Where I'd untied her shoes. Where I'd slept on the couch 4 nights a week for 8 months. 31 days. I called Patricia Voss at the legal aid office. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I was holding. She was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Bring me the will." The whole thing. All 4 pages. The hearing was set for December. Family Court. Clarksville. The courtroom was small. Room 4B. Montgomery County Family Court. Wood-paneled walls that needed refinishing. Overhead, fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency just low enough to be annoying. A clock on the wall above the judge's bench that ticked loud enough to count from the respondent's table. I counted. I always count. Garrett sat across the aisle in a navy blazer he must have bought for the occasion, because I'd never seen it before. His lawyer, Robert Fenton, sat beside him with a leather briefcase and a legal pad and the confident posture of a man who charges $350 an hour and believes every dollar is earned. Garrett's face was set. The jaw. The chin. The same posture he'd had on the football field at Clarksville High. Ready. Certain. Prepared for a game he'd already decided he was going to win. I sat with Patricia Voss from the legal aid office on Franklin Street. Patricia was 63 years old. She wore sensible shoes and reading glasses she kept on a cord around her neck, and she spoke the way small-town lawyers speak slowly, clearly, as if the truth required no rush. She had one manila folder. Inside, a copy of the will. The full copy. All 4 pages. She'd highlighted section 7, paragraph 2, in yellow. Do you think Dana knew what was on page 4? If you already know what happens next, drop it in the comments. The gallery was fuller than I'd expected. Mrs. Patterson was there. Linda Morrison. Bill Drucker, who'd closed the hardware store early because he said he needed to see this through. Amy Patterson, who'd come because her mother asked her to. Hadley from 4B, still in the only suit he owned. And Pastor Collins, who told me at the funeral that Mom was his anchor and had driven from the church because he said a woman who builds a house with 21 years of $11.40 an hour deserves witnesses when the house is at stake. 14 people in the gallery for a routine eviction hearing. That's not normal. That's a neighborhood showing up. Robert Fenton made his case. He was precise, organized. He cited Section 1, Paragraph 3 of the will. Equal shares. Garrett and Dana. Co-owners. He argued that as co-owner, Garrett had the legal right to request either the sale of the property or the removal of the co-tenant who was occupying it exclusively. He used the word exclusively 3 times. Like living in your dying mother's house to take care of her was an act of real estate aggression. He spoke for 11 minutes. He did not mention the 37 chemo sessions. He did not mention the tape measure. Patricia stood. She didn't argue the ownership. She didn't dispute the sections Fenton had cited. She didn't raise her voice or make a speech or do any of the things that television lawyers do. Your Honor, I direct the court's attention to page 4. Section 7, paragraph 2. Fenton flipped to page 4. His face changed, in stages. Like a man walking upstairs in the dark who discovers one fewer step than expected. Judge Morrison picked up the will. She read page 1. She read page 2. She turned to page 3. Then she turned to page 4. She read section 7, paragraph 2, aloud. Slowly. The way judges read things when they want every person in the room to hear every syllable and understand that what follows is not a suggestion. If either child attempts to remove the other from this home, through legal action, formal complaint, or any proceeding intended to force departure, that child forfeits their share of the property entirely. The remaining child shall receive full ownership. She looked up from the document. She looked at Garrett. She looked at Fenton. She looked at the motion they had filed, the motion that constituted, by its very existence, an attempt to remove one child from the home. The courtroom went vacuum quiet. Not the kind of silence where people are being polite. The kind where every person in the room is holding the same thought at the same time, and the thought is, he did it to himself. The kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes at the same time that the person who filed the motion just lost everything. Garrett's lawyer leaned to his ear, whispered. Garrett's face went from confusion to understanding to something darker. Your Honor, Fenton said, standing slowly. We were not aware of this clause. It's in the document you submitted, Counselor, Judge Morrison said. Exhibit A, page 4. Mrs. Drucker was in the gallery. She told me later she'd never seen a lawyer lose color that fast. Like watching paint peel. Amy Patterson was 3 rows back. She leaned to the woman beside her and said, his own filing. His own filing did it. Melanie, Patricia's paralegal, closed her eyes and exhaled. The kind of exhale when something you've been hoping for actually happens. The bailiff, Dale, who'd worked the courthouse 26 years, shook his head once and said under his breath, evicted himself. Judge Morrison dismissed the motion. She read the forfeiture clause into the record. The petitioner's own action triggers the condition. The property at 412 Maple Lane is awarded in full to Dana Marie Fletcher, Mrs. Patterson put both hands over her mouth. She was shaking. Not from cold. From the specific vibration of watching something you suspected for years confirmed in a courtroom with a judge and a clock and a clause that a dying woman wrote between chemo sessions. Linda Morrison closed her eyes. She'd known. She'd been Mom's neighbor. She'd watched the tape measure. She'd watched Garrett come and go in 4 hours. She'd known. And now, the knowing had a ruling. Hadley from 4B sat very still, his hands on his knees, his jaw working. He told me later he'd wanted to applaud, but you don't clap in a courtroom. Pastor Collins opened his eyes. He looked at the judge. He looked at me. He nodded once. The same nod he gave at the end of a sermon when the point had landed and there was nothing left to add. Bill Drucker leaned to his wife and said, in a voice that carried 3 rows, Howard built that house, but Helen wrote the blueprints. Garrett stood. His chair scraped the floor. He looked at me across the courtroom with an expression I'd only seen once before the night he broke my solar system. Confusion mixed with the realization that something is broken and it might be his fault. She did this. Mom did this because of you. He said it like an accusation. But the room heard it differently. The room heard, yes, she did it because of Dana. Because Dana showed up. Because Dana drove. Because Dana untied shoes and cooked dinner and watered tomatoes and stayed. Patricia didn't respond. The silence did the work. 14 people in the gallery, one clause on page 4, and a son who'd brought the weapon that destroyed his own case. Garrett's lawyer packed his briefcase. He didn't look at his client. He stood, nodded to the judge, and left the courtroom first. The door closed behind him with a hydraulic hiss. Garrett stood alone at the respondent's table. 4 seconds. He picked up his coat. He walked out. He passed the gallery. He passed Mrs. Patterson, who was still shaking. He passed Bill Drucker, who watched him go with his arms crossed. He passed Mr. Hadley, who lowered his eyes. And he walked through the door and into the hallway and didn't look back. Garrett spent $22,000 on legal fees. Robert Fenton charged $350 an hour. $22,000 to file a motion that contained the exact clause that would undo it. $22,000 to hand a judge the document that said, in his own mother's handwriting, that filing the document would cost him everything. He paid with money from the sale of his truck, the one he couldn't afford, the one with the monthly payment that was already 2 months late. He sold it to a dealership in Madison for $14,000 less than he owed. He still owes the bank the difference. Patricia found me in the hallway after the hearing. She was holding the manila folder, the one with the highlighted page 4. She looked at me over her reading glasses. Your mother wrote that clause in September. Between chemo sessions, she called Margaret Caldwell from her house. Margaret drove over on a Thursday afternoon. Your mother was sitting in the recliner with the oxygen tube. She dictated the clause. Margaret typed it. Your mother signed it with the pen she kept on the side table next to her crossword puzzles. She was that specific? The language is precise, Dana. Attempts to remove. Through legal action, formal complaint, or any proceeding. She covered every door. She closed every window. A dying woman in a recliner with an oxygen tube built a legal firewall that a $350 an hour Nashville attorney didn't see coming. Patricia smiled. The kind of smile that says, I've been doing this for a long time and I've never enjoyed a case more. She didn't need a law degree, Patricia said. She needed to know her son. Linda Morrison was waiting for me in the parking lot. She didn't ask how it went. She'd been in the gallery. She'd seen the whole thing. She just opened her car door and said, Sweet tea's at my house. Come when you're ready. I sat in my car for 5 minutes. Alone. In the parking lot of Montgomery County Family Court. The clock on the dashboard said 3:47 p.m. A Tuesday. The kind of day where the world shifts and the calendar doesn't notice. Mom wrote that clause knowing Garrett would file. She wrote it knowing he wouldn't read it. She wrote it knowing his lawyer would submit the very document that contained his own undoing. She built a trap out of paper and patience and the bone-deep understanding that her son would always skip to the part he wanted. He moved back to Nashville. His realtor friend in Clarksville told Mrs. Patterson he'd been looking at condos in the Gulch before the hearing, 2-bedroom, rooftop pool, $1,800 a month. After the hearing, he moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on Murfreesboro Pike in Antioch. No pool, no rooftop, a window that faces a parking lot. He got a job at a building supply store. $16 an hour? The same amount Mom was earning when she bought the house in 1998. Amy Patterson told me she ran into him at a gas station in March. She said he looked smaller. Not thinner. Smaller. Like someone had turned the volume down on everything about him. He was wearing a work polo with a name tag. She said she almost didn't recognize him. The swagger was gone. The jaw wasn't set. He was just a man buying gas on a Tuesday afternoon and trying not to make eye contact with someone who knew what he'd done. Within 3 months, the news spread through Clarksville the way news travels in a town of 4,000 quietly, completely, and without anyone admitting they'd heard it first. Bill Drucker heard about it at the diner on Riverside Drive. He told his wife, who told Mrs. Patterson, who told the woman at the garden center, who told Linda Morrison, who already knew because she'd been sitting in the gallery when Judge Morrison read page 4. The church choir knew by the following Sunday. Mom had been in the choir for 19 years. The women who'd sung beside her for 2 decades looked at the empty spot in the alto section, and then they looked at me, and I could see it in their faces, the slow understanding that the daughter who'd stayed was the one who got to keep the house, and the son who'd left was the one who lost it. Mrs. Patterson brought me a pot roast the week after the hearing. She set it on the porch with a note that said, "Your mother was right. About everything." She didn't specify. She didn't need to. He called once. March, different voice. Flat. "I need to get some things from the house." "What things?" "Football trophies. Some clothes. I'll put them on the porch." I did. 2 boxes. Trophies. Letterman jacket. Boots from high school. I set them on the porch next to the dogwood that was starting to bloom. He picked them up Saturday while I was at work. Didn't come inside. Didn't leave a note. Mom wrote that clause 6 months before she died, between chemo sessions. While I was in the waiting room, she was behind a closed door with Margaret Caldwell making sure her dying had a plan. She knew what Garrett would do. She'd watched him measure the living room. She'd watched him eat her food and ask about property values while she sat with an oxygen tube. She knew. She put the trap on the one page she knew he'd never read. Page 4. Because Garrett never reads past page 1. Patricia Voss sent me a card when she retired. It said, "In 12 years of family court, your mother's will is the finest piece of legal writing I've ever read." She didn't need a law degree. She needed to know her son. I framed it. It hangs in the kitchen next to the window where Mom watched the dogwood bloom. Next to the notebook. Next to the closing documents from First Federal. 3 pieces of paper that tell the whole story. 1 woman bought a house, 1 woman wrote a will, and 1 woman lived in it until she could hand it to the daughter who earned it. Hadley knocked on my door last month. He'd moved to a new apartment on the West Side Better Unit, closer to the plant. He brought me a jar of honey from a beekeeper he knows in Dover. "For the woman who made rent human," he said. I put it on the counter next to the sugar bowl and the notebook. The kitchen counter is becoming a museum of things people bring you when you've been decent to them for long enough. The house is mine. The mortgage is paid. Mom had paid it off in 2019. 21 years of $11.40 an hour, and she'd framed the final statement from First Federal and hung it in the hallway next to my high school graduation photo. 2 pieces of paper that proved the same thing. Showing up works. Mom's garden is in the backyard. Tomatoes, basil, green beans, and the marigolds along the fence. I water them on Tuesdays because that was her day. The tomatoes came in heavy last August. I gave some to Mrs. Patterson. I gave some to Mr. Hadley. I gave some to Linda Morrison, who set them on her kitchen counter and said, "These taste like Helen's." They do. The soil remembers. Her recliner is in the living room. I can't sit in it yet, but I can't move it either. It smells like her lotion lavender, the cheap kind from Dollar General that she bought in bulk, 3 bottles for $5. The indent of her body is still in the cushion. I straighten the blanket over it every morning the way she straightened the front desk at the Holiday Inn because someone might come in and things should be ready. I went back to work in January. Linda promoted me to full property manager. 23 units now. I hired an assistant, a young woman named Becky, who reminds me of me, At 22, she's quiet. She's precise. She takes notes on everything. I told her on her first day, the people in these buildings are not tenants. They're neighbors. The paperwork is how we remember them. Linda Morrison comes over Sundays. We sit on the porch. Sweet tea. The dogwood tree. She tells stories about Mom at the Holiday Inn, the time a pipe burst at 2 in the morning and Mom organized 4 maintenance workers in her bathrobe because nobody else was on shift. The time a guest child had an asthma attack in the lobby, and Mom called 911 while keeping the child calm and the parents upright and the other guests out of the way. Bill Drucker said Mom handled everything like a general. Linda says she handled it like a mother. I think both are right. My name is Dana Fletcher. I'm 31 years old. I drove my mother to 37 chemo sessions. I untied her shoes. I cooked the dinners. I held her hand at the end. My brother measured the living room while she was dying. He filed to evict me 3 days after she was buried. And his own paperwork triggered the clause she wrote on page 4. 37 sessions. I drove every one. He came twice. Both times he brought a tape measure. Mom counted both. Some people read the whole document. Some people skip to the part they want. And some mothers write the most important sentence on the page they know their son will never reach. If someone in your life has been doing the quiet work while someone else takes credit, sit with that for a moment. The quiet ones usually write the last page. I'll be right here on the porch when you're ready for the next one.